Good evening. Welcome to all of you for coming out to our second annual Home for the Holidays event. We're so delighted you're here. I'm Heather Crossan, President of First Principles Forum, and we'd like to welcome everyone. We'll have a few brief remarks and then we'll get right to it. But we'd like to start, as we always do, with an invocation. And we are so grateful to have Monsignor Shadle from St. Luke Parish here. We're a multi-faith group of people, but we all believe that this is perilous times for our nation and we need the help of God. So I'm so grateful to invite Monsignor Shadle for one of his wonderful invocations.
Thank you, Heather, and thank you for all that you do. Let us pray. O God, our Creator, at this wonderful season of the year, we in this great country recall the godly dignity and freedoms on which our nation was founded. We thank you that we are not founded on half-truths, on fear, manipulation, or intimidation. We thank you that we are founded on our right to life, to liberty, the pursuit of happiness, the natural law, and common sense. We ask you to bless our gathering this evening, celebrating the fundamental principles on which our land was established. Give us all the strength of mind and heart to readily defend these freedoms when they are threatened. Give us all courage in making our voices heard on behalf of the rights with which all people are endowed by you, our Creator. Almighty God, under your protection, may this great land always be a land of the gift of peace, which the Christ child came to bring all peoples. You are one God, living and true, forever and ever. Amen.
Thank you, Monsignor Shadle. I appreciate that. And we'll keep our remarks limited so we can get right down to the show. First, I'd like to say a few thank yous. I'd like to thank all of you for coming. And I'd particularly like to thank the members of the host committee who are noted in your program. Their generosity, as well as that of many others, have helped make this evening possible, from the volunteers to the event chairs, who again are listed in the program, to all of you coming and bringing your friends and family at what we know is a very busy time of year. First Principles Forum is a nonprofit 501c3 educational organization that is committed to bringing speakers that we believe are lacking in our local community to hopefully educate multiple generations of people and to broaden the local political debate on issues that are important and timely. I'd also like to give a special thanks to Linda Oldegas of My Indie Image. She has graciously donated not only her time at this event to film and capture our evenings, but at every event we've had. And so I'd like to encourage everyone to, look at Linda's wonderful website. She does great work, and we are grateful for all the photos we have of past events on our website, thanks to Linda's assistance. I'd also like to say we are grateful for all the young people that are here. In the past, we've had a Young Professionals Network call out last fall, and we were so delighted. Over 40 people between the ages of about 21 and 30 attended, and many of them have stayed engaged. And we think that's one of the unique and special features about First Principles Forum. And so with that, when we looked at who we'd like to have introduce our guest speaker, we thought, well, let's invite one of our young professionals. So I am delighted to introduce Caroline Smith, who will be introducing our speaker this evening. She is a Brebeuf graduate, 2020 graduate from IU Bloomington, an Orr Fellow, and she is currently working at Elevance Health. I'd like to thank Caroline and welcome her to the stage.
Good evening and welcome. It's my honor and privilege to introduce Matt Walsh. Matt is a popular writer, speaker, and one of the right's most influential voices. He is the host of The Matt Walsh Show and author of the best-selling children's book, Johnny the Walrus. His documentary, What is a Woman?, has become a cultural phenomenon and one of the most talked about documentaries of 2022. Again, it is my privilege to honor Mr. Matt Walsh.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you to the First Principles Forum. I learned a little bit about the organization and how just kind of a quick start it's gotten to and some of the great speakers they've had already. And I feel like the bar may have been set a little bit too high for me. So I wish I'd started with some worse speakers than building up, but came out of the gate with Candace Owens. So now, just to set the stage here, we live in a culture, a country, which seems to have almost entirely lost its mind. Maybe you've noticed that. We're living through a period of mass psychosis that is very truly unprecedented in the history of human civilization. It seems as though all at once, millions of our countrymen woke up one day having forgot some of the most basic facts about reality. Like a giant epidemic of the weirdest sort of amnesia the world's ever seen. Lying at the heart of this intellectual chaos is the confusion, or apparent confusion, over human biology. It's a mental disease called gender ideology, which has gripped hold of a large swath of the American public and totally taken control of all of our most important institutions. The disciples of this cult have been convinced, or pretend to have been convinced anyway, that men are women, women are men, that men can have babies, women can have penises, that a woman can impregnate a man who can then give birth to and breastfeed a child, that somehow the most basic facts of reality and of biology, facts which all people everywhere across the entire world for thousands of years all recognized intuitively, are no longer valid. Now, it's total madness, and it's a madness which has infected our society, is now threatening to tear it apart at the seams. It was for this reason that we decided that we had to make our film called What is a Woman?, which documents my year-long effort to confront and expose gender ideology. Now, our goal broadly was to expose gender ideology, show it for what it is, but as the title suggests, this goal centered around one central question, which is, what is a woman? So backing up, oh, there's actually people in the audience, okay. I was wondering. Backing up a few years, it occurred to me sometime shortly after Bruce Jenner became Caitlyn and was immediately declared Woman of the Year, that the word woman ceases to have any meaning if a guy named Bruce can be considered one. The word man, too, also doesn't mean anything in that case. It occurred to me also that this is a major problem for the left, for the people promoting this agenda, because if the word woman no longer means adult human female, then what does it mean? And if the left cannot tell us what it means, then how can they use the word? I mean, how can they have women's marches and talk about women's rights or say anything else at all about women if the word doesn't mean anything? Indeed, how can a man say, I identify as a woman, if the word woman doesn't mean anything? It's about as meaningful then as saying, I identify as a whoosy-what's-it or a flifferdoodle. It's just gibberish. How can someone identify as gibberish if that's all the word is? And if they do, how are we supposed to affirm or respect that gibberish? I could not affirm nonsense even if I wanted to, and I don't want to. So it became obvious to me that this question, what is a woman, presents an insurmountable, logical problem for the left and for transgenderism as a concept. And so I kept asking the question and asking it in every forum available to me. But they simply ignored the question to the extent that they could and carried on pretending like their worldview was not fatally incoherent and self-contradictory. And after years of this game, of them ducking and dodging the question, I finally decided that it was time to take this query to them, to put it directly in front of their faces, to confront them with it intentionally and directly in a way that they would not be able to escape. And so began a quest that took us all over the country, even halfway around the world, to Kenya, and to some other regions of the third world like Los Angeles. And we spoke to alleged experts, doctors, therapists, professors, surgeons. We spoke to trans people, we spoke to activists, we spoke to politicians, we spoke to average people on the street, we spoke to nomadic tribesmen living in huts made out of cow dung. We spoke to everyone who would speak to us, and even some people who would not speak to us. And we gave the people promoting and pushing this ideology a chance to explain it for themselves, to defend it, to advocate for their own worldview on intelligent and rational grounds. And what we found is that none, not one of them, could or would take us up on this offer. And that is because gender ideology is indefensible. It is indefensible in every way, from every angle. It is indefensible scientifically, rationally, logically, morally. So at the end of our journey, my own position on the subject was unchanged, except that I was more convinced of it than ever before. And my position, the position I imagine is shared by many of the people in this room, and also by nearly all the people who have ever lived on the face of the planet, is that a man is an adult human male and a woman is an adult human female. These are the two categories. There are no other categories. That's it. Which is why even those who profess to believe in a non-binary system, you notice, still cannot tell you what the third and fourth and fifth and sixth sex are called. They say there's more than male and female, and then you say, okay, what are the other ones? And they can't tell you. And that's because there are only male gametes and female gametes, males and females, men and women. This is all that exists in our species. It's not complicated. It's not confusing. It's not controversial until we made it controversial. That's also why nobody ever was confused about this topic until about, comparatively, 8 seconds ago. So I oppose gender ideology because it is not true. And I oppose all things that are not true. I don't need any other reason to oppose something other than it's not true. Now, how stridently or forcefully I oppose something really depends on how stridently or forcefully it is asserted. So, for example, if somebody comes along and claims that a circle is a shape with 4 equal straight sides and 4 right angles, I will simply say, no, that's not a circle, that's a square. Squares are not circles. You idiot. Just gotta throw that in. But I probably would not give any college lectures about it, give a speech about it. I probably wouldn't make a documentary on the subject. But if there were to suddenly arise a well-coordinated and well-funded movement to convince the world that geometry is fluid and that squares are circles and circles are squares, and if this movement captured the minds of millions of people, especially young people, then I would probably make a film called What is a Square? And I would spend lots of time engaging on the topic because I live in reality, and in reality, squares are squares, circles are circles, men are men, women are women. And it's worth defending reality for its own sake. Because many bad things follow from a collective flight from reality. And the consequences are more and more dire the more deeply the untruth burrows into our mind and into the culture. And the untruth at the core of gender ideology, of the transgender phenomenon, reaches down to the deepest conceivable levels. Much deeper than questions of geometry. In fact, gender ideology wages its assault against our knowledge of ourselves. So a person fully enthralled to this lunacy has lost grip not just on reality in the abstract, although he has lost grip on that as well. He's lost grip on the reality of himself. Gender ideology doesn't simply replace one notion of the self with some other newer notion. Rather, it replaces one notion of the self with no notion at all. And that is the whole reason why the gender ideologue cannot answer the what is a woman question, cannot name any of the other sexes besides male and female, despite claiming that there are countless others. And that's because he seeks to replace what is definable and knowable with a hazy, indecipherable mess of contradictions and falsehoods. This is always the game when our culture redefines something. We say that it's being redefined. The word woman is redefined. Well, it's not really redefined, because redefined means that you're getting rid of one definition and giving a new one. But what the left does is they get rid of the old definition and replace it with nothing. So whether it's woman or marriage or any other term that they've done this to, It's a process of emptying it of meaning and replacing it with nothing. It becomes a sort of vacuum. He replaces light with darkness, the gender ideologue does, and soon gets lost in it himself and will probably eventually succumb to that darkness, to the despair. In a large percentage of cases, suicide. And that's because a person cannot live in this state. A person cannot live in a state of rejecting reality, rejecting the truth of himself. Cannot live for long, certainly cannot thrive in that state, cannot be happy in it. Anxiety. We hear a lot about anxiety these days. Well, what is anxiety? Anxiety is the unease that comes from uncertainty, from the unknown. It's why nobody likes walking down into a dark basement at night, because you don't know what's down there. Your mind fills in the gaps with all kinds of terrifying possibilities. This is also why Joe Biden's handlers get very nervous when he steps in front of a microphone. They have no idea what he's going to say or what kind of childhood stories he's going to make up. So this is also anxiety. Now, gender ideology, then, is like an anxiety machine because it makes a person's fundamental physical identity uncertain to himself. This is why you see especially a lot of these kids on TikTok, and they're coming up with new pronouns and new genders every day. And we kind of laugh about it because it's absurd, and that's an appropriate way to respond to absurdity. But underneath the absurdity is something quite dark and terrible, especially for these kids, because what we find is that they just have no idea who they are. They have no clue at all. It is an identity crisis that has been foisted onto them. It's no surprise that Americans are reporting record levels of anxiety at precisely the time when these kinds of ideas are gaining prominence, ideas which turn out the intellectual lights, turning our minds into that dark basement. Now, to make matters worse, the people we trust to heal our anxiety and to give us clarity, therapists, counselors, psychiatrists, they have in many cases abdicated their responsibilities and turned their back on the very nature and purpose of their profession. The gender-confused person crippled with anxiety, teetering near total despair, will have his confusion affirmed, his despair affirmed, his anxiety affirmed. They call it the affirmative model of care, and that is what they are doing. They are affirming exactly what they should be treating instead. The affirmative model of care makes about as much sense in mental health as it would in the realm of physical health. You know, you would, if you went to the doctor complaining about a headache, you would not be very satisfied if you told him about your symptoms and then he said, "Yep, your head does hurt. I affirm you. Your feelings are valid." That'll be $200. No, you need him to do the opposite. You need him to treat what is hurting you, not to affirm it. But this is how the medical industry treats, quote-unquote, gender confusion. It treats it by feeding it. So the gender-confused person goes to the therapist and says, "I feel like I'm in the wrong body. I feel like my body is all wrong. I feel like there's something wrong with me physically. I shouldn't look like this. I shouldn't be like this." And what does he hear from the therapist? He hears, "Yes, you're right. I affirm you. You are in the wrong body. Your body is wrong. And the only solution is to start chopping pieces of you off until the bad thoughts go away." Now, it is barbaric and evil, and that's why I oppose it. This is why we should all oppose it with every fiber of our beings. But what does the other side have to say for itself? You know, they must have some sort of response, some points to offer of their own, some rebuttals. And that's true. You know, they do bring a few arguments to the table, even if those arguments are rather stupid. So tonight I want to run through some of the most common objections that gender ideologues make to the points that I've raised and respond to them ahead of time. Because these are the things, when we go out and we're talking about these issues, these are the things that we're going to hear in response. And too often what I see is the person who begins with the right point of view, men are men, women are women, and you would think that we're standing on very solid ground. How could you lose the argument? And what I find so often is that, the person who is standing on solid ground does lose the argument because they get kind of flustered by these rebuttals, which are often disingenuous and misleading. So we'll go through them. Objection one, they'll say, well, you talk about sex and gender like they're the same thing, but they're not. Sex is biological, but gender is a person's understanding or feeling about themselves. You see, so it's two different things. The answer to that, no. I don't think that sex and gender are the same. It is you, the gender ideologue, who has essentially collapsed the very sex versus gender distinction that you engineered. Now, there was a time, perhaps, when you, the gender ideologue, would have agreed that there is at least a biological difference between a woman who is female and a self-identified woman who is male. There's a time when that would have been agreed upon. But now you yourself have erased that difference. You insist that trans women are women. You insist that they're exactly the same in every way. You have changed the definition of female in the Webster's dictionary to include men with the gender identity of female. So you treat both the term woman and the term female as interchangeable. They are both now gender identities, according to you. Now, if you did still affirm a definitional distinction between sex and gender, then you would have to also affirm that there is in this world a binary category of male and female, and that those who belong to each group cannot cross between the two. But you will not affirm any binary at all, or any substantive distinction at all between the so-called trans woman and the biological woman, which means that the whole gender versus sex thing was nothing but a sleight of hand trick. That's all it ever was. Now, as for me, I have no use for the term gender at all, unless we're talking about the gender of words, which is where the term originates in the English language. For most of the history of the English language, if somebody was talking about gender, they were talking about a word. It's a grammatical construct. There was no notion, if you had gone to someone in 1850 and asked them what their gender was, they would have been very confused because it wouldn't have made any sense. People don't have genders, they have sex. We don't need this concept of gender. Now, I see only men and women, males and females. Each individual in either group has a different way of being, a different way of expressing themselves, different ways of understanding the world, of interacting with the world, of presenting themselves to the world. All that is true. There are many, many ways to be a man. There are many, many ways to be a woman. I don't deny that. But see, we already have a word to describe that. We have a word to describe the ways in which a man is a man and the ways in which a woman is a woman, and that word is personality. And what's happened is that we've gotten rid of personality and we've replaced it with gender. And that's how we end up in a situation where you can have people these days who have, 5 different genders and 3 different sexual orientations, but no personality to speak of. Because all of this has been consumed is essentially drowned in the LGBT alphabet soup. Objection 2, they say, you say that women can get pregnant, but that's how you define women. But what about women who can't get pregnant? Does the existence of infertile women not clearly disprove your definition of the word? What about intersex people? See, checkmate. Well, answer. See, I don't say that every woman in the world can get pregnant. Obviously, that is not true. It is more accurate to say, if we're talking about defining the word woman, one of the ways that we would define a woman is to say that woman is that member of the human species who, by her nature, can become pregnant. By her nature can become pregnant. So in a similar way, I might describe a human being by saying, among other things, that he is a creature who walks on 2 legs. Does that statement become invalid just because babies can't walk and some people don't even have 2 legs? Does the existence of amputees and those with birth defects invalidate the claim that humans have 2 legs? If you were to, say, ask to describe a human being to some alien from outer space who had no idea, would you say, well, humans have 2 legs, or would you say humans can really have any number of legs? No, you wouldn't, because such a statement would bring to mind these kind of horrifying images of people who look like centipedes or like slugs slithering across the ground. You could be more specific in your description because it's true that humans have 2 legs unless accident or disease or deformity intervenes. So the humans without legs should have 2 legs. The doctors can automatically know that a human who is born with only 1 leg has some sort of condition that has left him in that state. They'll run tests. They'll figure out what the condition is. But they'll never say, well, some humans have 1 leg. Legs are on a spectrum. No, the absence of the additional leg is a 100% confirmation that something has gone wrong. Because humans are meant to have 2, this is known as the exception that proves the rule. The same with the sexes and their reproductive abilities. Age, disease, genetic defect, other circumstances can preclude some females and some males from partaking in human reproduction, but that does not at all even slightly call into question our understanding of the sexes or of their definitions. Every female is of the nature to get pregnant. She is supposed to be able to get pregnant unless she's too old or suffers from some sort of ailment. So a woman who's 28, unable to get pregnant, should go to the doctor. The doctor will know that something is wrong, and he will usually be able to tell you what it is. Sometimes he can fix it. Because a woman is supposed to be able to get pregnant, because she's a woman. On the other hand, a man who goes to the doctor and says, "Doc, I can't get pregnant," the doctor will know that there's not something wrong with his body, but something wrong with his mind. Or at least doctors used to know that. I don't know about these days. What about intersex? This is important too. Well, this is irrelevant to transgenderism, first of all. A trans woman, quote unquote, is a biological male who says he's a woman. How is his claim about himself vindicated or confirmed by the existence of intersex people when he himself is not intersex? This is part of the left's game, is this obfuscation, this kind of this red herring, changing the subject. They want to justify or defend one proposition. In order to do that, they point to something totally unrelated and hope that we don't notice, and very often we don't notice, or at least don't point it out. So in order to vindicate, the claim that a, quote, trans woman makes about himself, they'll point to an intersex person, even though that person is not intersex to begin with. But anyway, it doesn't matter, because intersex people are not a third category. They're not a third sex. Intersex people belong to an extremely small population who suffer from a medical condition that makes their sex more ambiguous, difficult to determine. It doesn't mean they don't have one, or it doesn't mean that they belong to a different sex entirely. But this is all academic because, again, the tiny population of intersex people have nothing to do with the rapidly increasing population of self-identified trans people. And even if there existed on this earth a person with the functional reproductive capacities of both sexes, in other words, someone who's able to get pregnant and be impregnated, which would be a true intersex person, that person doesn't exist, but even if they did, that would still do nothing at all to validate the self-identity of a biological male claiming to be a woman. Objection 3, they say, trans people have existed throughout history and all over the world. The binary is a Western construct. This is a very common rebuttal. It's also the dumbest damn thing that I've ever heard, probably. No, I mean, you might as well say that photosynthesis or gravity are Western constructs. Now, thanks to Western science, we might know more about these processes and these phenomena, but Western society didn't invent them. No, on the contrary, the rejection of the binary is a modern Western construct. Gender ideology was invented by old white guys in Western culture very recently. We know who those guys were. They wrote books, they made arguments, they said things. They came up with these terms, John Money, Alfred Kinsey among them. We talk about a little bit in the film, What is a Woman? It also happens that they abused children. These men were pedophiles, which I think is not a coincidence. That this idea, is something that was tied to pedophilia and grooming from the very beginning. We can trace their ideas back to their roots, and we don't have to go very deep. Now, the idea that men are male and women are female, and that the two categories are immutable and cannot be changed, that traces all the way back to the dawn of human civilization. There has never been a culture before ours that believed men could have babies. This madness is uniquely modern. Nobody before us was stupid enough to believe something quite like that. It really took the most educated and technologically advanced civilization in history to come up with something that insane. Now, everything I'm saying here doesn't comport with the claims that we often hear. You've probably heard about many cultures throughout history and around the globe who have more expansive ideas about gender. They in fact are more progressive on this issue than we are. The people telling you this are lying. And you can take it from me, I've actually traveled across the globe, and I've gone outside of the Western bubble, and which is something I can guarantee that very few people on the left have actually done. But here's where I think the confusion arises. There are other cultures where, in some circumstances, a man may play the role of a woman. There are places where, for one reason or another, a man may dress as a woman or play the part of a woman. That does happen on occasion. But none of these cultures believe that a man actually is a woman. That's the difference. Outside of the West and Western influence, you will not hear of pregnant men anywhere. And you certainly wouldn't have heard about them, historically. We have to keep in mind that what the left likes to do in our culture is they retcon history by imposing their ideas back onto it. So you'll hear it claimed, for example, that Native American cultures have something called two-spirit, which they've even added this now to the LGBT acronym. Now there's 2S. They have a number now in the LGBT thing. So it looks like a randomly generated password at this point. And what they tell you is that two-spirit is the indigenous version of transgenderism. And this is a very historical thing. It's a very traditional thing. But then you look into it, and you discover that this label was actually invented by gay activists in 1990. And even then, it obviously describes something spiritual, something religious. It does not describe a physical male who is actually literally a woman. If you ever get a hold of a time machine and can go back 150 years, head out to the Great Plains and ask a Comanche warrior whether men can get pregnant, probably not going to like the way he delivers that answer to you. Objection 4, and this is probably the most common thing that we hear, not just on this issue, but pretty much on any other, especially a cultural or so-called social issue. They say, why do you care so much anyway? Why can't you just leave people alone? Let them be. What does it matter? What difference does any of this make to you? Well, the answer to that is, first of all, that's not a rebuttal to an argument. That's really an intellectual surrender. The moment somebody says, you've rebutted everything else they've said, every other argument they've presented, and then they say, well, what do you care anyway for? They're giving up. But also, when this comes from an LGBT activist or a trans activist, it's a very interesting thing for them to say. Because, why are you asking me why I care so much? Aren't you the one who insists that we should care deeply about trans issues and LGBT issues? You throw parades around this. You announce your sexuality and your gender identity to the world. You have flags. You can't put something on a flag and then ask me why I care about it. You won't shut up about it. Why do I care? Well, you want me to care. You literally demand that I care. You won't allow me to not care. It's just that you want me to care in the way you have determined and arrive at the conclusions that you have pre-approved. You have a problem. It's not the fact that I care that you have a problem with. It's the conclusions that I have drawn. That's the issue that you have. And you're too cowardly and shallow to debate the conclusions, so instead you pretend that you just want to mind your own business, even though you were, like 10 seconds ago, dancing in the street in leather bondage gear, shouting about your lifestyle choices into a megaphone at a bunch of confused children. So please don't give me that why do I care nonsense. But since you asked, this hypothetical person I'm talking to, I will answer. And again, the answer is very, very simple, because I'm a simple man. Why do I care about this? Well, I could tell you that I care about this and that it matters because children are having their lives ruined by it and their lives taken by it when you look at the suicide rate. I could point to that. I could look at the fact that trans identification among the youngest generation has increased 10 or 20-fold over their grandparents' generation. Nothing like this has ever happened in human history. If you look at trans and LGBT identification broadly, and the increases that we've seen over just 10 years, it is It is unprecedented. So we could talk about that. We could talk about the fact that women are having their opportunities stolen, the fact that women are having their privacy taken away from them, their identities appropriated. All of that is true. But even more fundamentally than that, I care because the truth matters. It just simply matters on its own terms. It matters for its own sake. And it matters more than anything else. It matters more than your ideology. It matters more than your preferences. It matters more than your feelings. It matters more than your self-perceptions and self-identification. The truth matters more than anything. I mean, it matters more than your life and more than mine. I often hear that when we talk about these things, and specifically when I talk about them, I'm putting people's lives at risk. That's what I hear. As media, I've been accused in many articles by many media outlets of putting people's lives at risk for talking about the things and saying the things I'm saying right now. Now, that's obviously ridiculous. But even if it was true that talking about this and engaging on these issues put people's lives at risk, I would still talk about it. Because it's worth it. I would talk about it if it put my own life at risk, which, according to the death threats that I get nearly every day, it does. But I would die for the truth, and that's not a self-aggrandizing sort of thing to say. It's just because what is life without it? What's the point of life without truth? Life can have no meaning. Nothing can have meaning apart from truth. So when I say that I would rather be dead than give up on this fight, it's because living after having given up on it doesn't seem very appealing to me. There is nothing to fight for except the truth. There's nothing to live for except the truth. There is no love without truth. There's no beauty without truth. There's no joy without truth. There's no freedom without truth. There is nothing without truth. And that's why we can't give it up for anyone's sake. The truth matters. If we will not defend this hill, as they always say, the way they like to phrase it, you really want to die on this hill? Is this the hill you want to die on? Well, yeah. I mean, I don't plan on dying on the hill. But the hill of basic truth, if there's one worth dying on, it's this one. Because what else is worth defending? And once we give up this hill, and for the squishy conservatives who like to say, well, we don't need to talk about this. Let them have this one. Let's move on to the next battle. Well, what's the next battle after you've given this up? You've given up objective reality. You've given up reality itself. You have ceded that, surrendered that. Where are you going next? What else is worth defending? This has to be it. This is where we plant our own flag. This is the hill worth dying on. And that's why we're all here, after all, for the sake of truth. Thank you, everybody. I think we're doing a little Q&A.
Yep.
Actually, I was just standing here so you guys will keep clapping, but you stopped, so okay.
My question is, how does this play out? How does it end? What is the end scene? I mean, we can talk what we like, but...
Yeah, I think it plays out, this is not a battle that is won overnight, and I think one of the problems that we have is that we always are looking for easy solutions and quick solutions, and we see it as I don't know, defeatism or cynicism to say that we're not going to win this battle or any other important cultural battle in the short term. But I don't see that as defeatism. I see that as realism. And I also see it, it's almost liberating in a way to just acknowledge this. Like, I am not going to live to see the day when all of this is in the past. I don't think I'm going to live to see that day. Maybe my children will. Maybe my grandchildren. And that can be kind of liberating to realize that our job, we're here to fight. We're not going to see the ultimate victory. And that's okay. On the other hand, I do think that there are smaller but still very significant victories that can be achieved in the short term. So the overall battle against gender ideology as a concept, that's a long-term goal. And the left got themselves into this position over the course of generations. And so it's probably going to take generations to get us out of it. But some of the short-term things, like, for example, the ways in particular that they are targeting this at kids, I think we are seeing a growing backlash and a mainstream backlash against that, to the point where even now some corporate media outlets like the New York Times are starting to acknowledge that, hey, maybe putting kids on chemical castration drugs isn't the greatest idea. They're about 10 years late, 15 years late to that realization, but the fact that they're coming to that realization at all is significant. So I do think that we could live to see the day, very soon in fact, when it is essentially illegal to do this to kids all across the country, and that would be a major victory. So that I think we can do. Long term, though, I think it's still a long battle.
Hi, Matt. Thank you so much for coming to speak to us tonight. My question is, how in American society have we reached the level of suggestibility to where objective reality has been subverted and that has just become accepted and commonplace in society?
Yeah, well, I think you stumbled on the answer there. That this is about objective reality. It's the rejection of objective reality. This is one thing that I encountered, and you could see it in the film What Is Woman, but also in many of the conversations that didn't make it into the film. Pretty much every conversation I had with somebody about gender ideology on the left side, every conversation eventually devolved, and rather quickly devolved into, well, what is truth anyway? Is there a truth? It's like eventually you always end up talking to Pontius Pilate. What is truth? Because that's what they're rooted in, is the rejection of objective truth. That's the ultimate goal of gender ideology and of everything else on the left. That's their cultural project, is to establish a society where when they say this is my truth, they mean it literally. I have my own truth, you have your own truth. We all exist in our own universes with our own planets that orbit entirely around us. So how did we get to this point? I think it sort of depends on where you want to start. I mean, you want to go back to the Garden of Eden, we could go back there. Gender ideology came into being, in the mid-20th century, rather. But Carl Trueman, who wrote a book called The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self, is also in the film. And he wrote it, and his book is excellent on this, and he traces the origins back to 200-300 years ago. But it's all this slow process of rejecting the concept of objective truth. And as our culture has bought into that, these ideas have been the consequence of it.
Thanks, Matt. My name is David Seibel, and I work at a school called Coram Deo Academy. I have a question for you about education. I know you've been involved with school boards. You just referenced Carl Trueman, who's very involved in the classical Christian schooling movement. Ever since going through Teach for America over the last 10 years in Hamilton County and Marion County, I've seen our schools change quite a bit. And so how do you recommend conservative parents, when they're thinking about school choice, what do you recommend for them to think through?
Well, I think you have to realize that there are a few challenges when you send your kid away to a school, that is, you choose not to educate them yourselves in your home. There are some fundamental challenges you're going to encounter, almost regardless of the cultural situation. And one of those challenges is that you are sending your kids away from you for 6 to 7 hours a day, 5 days a week, 9 months a year for 12 or 13 years. The most formative and crucial years. They will not be with you. They will be with somebody else. And that somebody else, that institution, that is going to be the primary thing that determines your child's moral formation. There's almost no way around it because the competition is too great. So that's a long way of saying that I think, personally, the first thing we should consider is whether, if we're deciding what our education plan is going to be for our kids, first thing to consider is whether we're just going to do it ourselves. And I think that's going to be the right choice for millions and millions of parents, especially parents who don't have a great classical school or a private school. There are plenty of private schools in every area, but it might be too expensive. And many times private schools, the cultural situation is not much better than the public schools. So I think that has to be the go-to option for a lot of parents. But if you can't for some reason, and there are parents who simply cannot do that, maybe a single parent and they can't stay home and raise a kid because they got to go earn a living, that's when, now it's just a matter of the second best option. And the one thing to keep in mind there is if you do find that you have to send your kid, for example, to public school, this is a last resort, but if you have to do it, then it's so crucial, and this is the case for parents that also have homeschool kids, but especially if you send your kid to public school, when they come home, they have to be home now. They're at home, they're with you, and what that means is they're not on their phone, they're not on the computer. Because the problem is that these kids, they spend almost all their time in this peer culture in the schools, then they come home, and they carry it with them, like this cloud, this fog that they stay in all day. They need to come home and be re-centered on the home life and on you, so that they can orient themselves based on you and pick up the cues that you're giving them. So I think that's really important. All right.
I wonder if you could articulate what you think the queer theorist role or goal is, like what's their end game, and also a few words on maybe how we can fight this in our churches. Thanks.
Well, first of all, to take your second question first, how do you fight in the churches? My first recommendation is you fight it in the churches by doing literally anything at all, because most churches are doing absolutely nothing on this issue, zero. So anything, anything would be better than nothing. And I know this is not the case for everybody, and there may be people in this room that are thinking, I go to a church where they engage on this issue. If so, God bless you, that's amazing. You are in a minority, I can tell you that. In fact, I can tell you that I go to church every week, and I've been doing that for 36 years. I have never, not once, heard this issue even alluded to from the pulpit. And I'm not aware of even any kind of after-church groups that have addressed this issue. It is very rare. The churches have just totally abdicated here and surrendered. And it's an absolute disgrace. So whatever church you go to, I would... If you have a pastor or priest who is part of this problem here and is not doing anything to show leadership on this issue, to give guidance to parents on this issue, then I would go and I would talk to the leaders of your church and say, where are you on this? Okay, our kids are dying out there. We're dying out there. This is the world that we live in. We're struggling through this. This is the reality we live in every single day. And yet we come to church and it's like stepping into some sort of portal where it's like an alternate reality where these things don't exist. That's the first thing. What was the first question? I went right to the second question. I skipped over the first.
End game with queer theorists.
The end game of queer theorists and of the left generally, I think, is simply destruction. I don't think that there is a game after that. I think they see the things that they want to tear down, and it's like I talked about in the speech. They tear things down, they take words and concepts and empty them of meaning, but then they don't replace it with anything. They just leave it in rubble. And so I think the queer theorist has honed in on enemies that it sees, like the institution of the nuclear family. And his goal is to destroy that and to sever those bonds because he sees it as an enemy. But then what does he do next? Well, just leave it in rubble. And if we're replacing the family with anything, we replace it with the bonds of the state. You take children away from their parents, and you make them skeptical and cynical about their parents, and you direct them towards the state. So if there is any end goal, then it's probably that.
I'll try not to take your first response personally.
Present company excluded, Father.
With that response, I have lots of other questions. In all seriousness, my friend Chris Tolman and I should have talked. My question is this, and if you could speak brass tacks, game strategy-wise, how did you work on the ground against Vanderbilt University, the transgender clinic there that was in operation, apparently is shut down? How did that begin? How did it Thank you for that, and I ask, because walking distance from here, we have Riley Children's Hospital doing the same thing.
And children's hospitals around the country are doing this. If you don't live in a state where it's been made illegal, and then you can assume that it's happening in every children's hospital and probably every hospital. And if it's not happening in every hospital in the area, they at least will refer patients to someplace that will do it. How did we work this out with Vanderbilt? Yeah, we exposed the gender program at Vanderbilt, where they were giving chemical castration drugs to minors. They were mutilating kids. They were chopping the breasts off of girls as young as, I believe it was 16, perhaps even younger. And as soon as we exposed it, within a couple of weeks, they shut down the entire program. And now, once the legislature is back in session, which should be January 9th, I believe, they will immediately pass a law in Tennessee that bans these procedures for minors across the entire state, period. And also, very importantly, not only bans the procedures, but gives victims a chance to seek justice in the form of suing medical providers who have done this to them. Because right now, in most states, I believe in every state except for Tennessee, people who are victims of this and who come to regret it later cannot sue. They cannot sue for medical malpractice. That'll be changed in Tennessee. How did we do it? Well, it was relatively simple. I wish I could tell you that there was some sort of really complicated, clever investigation that we launched, and we hired private eyes, and we were digging through trash and showing up in disguise. And I wish I could tell you that, because that'd be a much better story, but that's not what we did. In fact, all we did was we wondered, well, we have this hospital right next door. Are they doing this stuff? And we went on their website and we saw that, well, yes, they are. And then we did do some digging for about a week to find all the documentation we could find. We found a lot of it. I mean, we found videos, and if you saw the thread that I put up on Twitter that started all this, you're familiar with some of these videos, where these doctors were talking very openly about doing these things to kids, bragging about how much money they were making off of it. And this is all out there. And all we had to do was take it and compile it and bring it to people's attention. And as soon as we did that, things started to change overnight, because what we discovered is that, thank God, still, the vast majority of Americans are not okay with butchering and mutilating kids. They're not okay with it. But the vast majority of Americans don't realize that this is happening. They don't think it's happening around them. They don't think it's as widespread as it actually is. And so oftentimes all you have to do is just raise awareness of it, and then that will generate a backlash, and it almost takes care of itself from there. So it was really an awareness campaign that we launched, and everything flowed from that.
Hi, Mr. Walsh. I'm a big fan of your show, and I'm a senior in high school, and I don't necessarily want to go to college after I finish my 12th grade year, and I'm really not sure what the other options are, and I'm sort of at a loss for what to do next, and I was wondering if you had any ideas or suggestions.
Yeah, well, here's the great thing. You said you're a senior in high school? The great thing is that despite what you may be told by the culture and maybe some of the things you've heard from your friends or people at school, despite any of that, it's not a race. You're not in a race with anybody, turns out. This is just your life. This is the life. This is the one life that you have to live on this earth. And so it's okay to not know. It's okay to graduate high school, and your instinct is you don't know what you want to do with your life, but you're skeptical about just jumping right into college, given that you don't know, right? Is that a fair summary? That you're already, if it was a race, you're already way ahead of a lot of your peers, because that is a common sense, rational. This is called being prudent, and this should actually be the default mode for almost every high school graduate. It is crazy in my mind that we are ushering millions of 18-year-olds into college and telling them to make these enormous financial commitments, even when they themselves will tell us that they don't know what they want to do. And so we say, well, go spend $100,000 and then figure it out. In no other situation would you ever recommend that someone spend $100,000 on something and then figure out if they can do anything with it. So what I would say to you is I think graduate high school and then go live your life. Maybe you go, you get a job somewhere, you work somewhere, and you just take time to reflect on it, meditate, pray about it, figure out what your passions are in life. Maybe you don't know that yet, and there's no rush at all. And if you decide 3 years from now you want to go to college, then you can. The only downside is that you'll be 3 years wiser. Maybe you'll have some money in the bank too. If you decide 20 years from now you want to go to college, you can. So just take your time and think about it. That's what I would say.
Hi, Mr. Walsh. Thank you for everything you do, especially for the kids. I work for a big company, and the HR department is getting more woke by the day. So I just wanted to get your advice on how to just do my job without dealing with all the woke bureaucracy that goes on in a big company. And lastly, will you please autograph my son's Johnny the Walrus book after the show?
This is the kind of indoctrination we like to see, Johnny the Walrus. So here's what I would say. That I get this question a lot about people that work at these kind of corporations and also people that go to college and they're in a very hostile environment. And the first thing I would say is that you are not required to go jump on every grenade that you find, to run into every room, announcing your views and confronting everyone. That's what I do because that's my job, but not everyone has that job or that vocation. So I think it's okay you have your job to do, you have your goals in mind, and so if that's what you're focused on doing, and you keep your head down, you do that, and you just try to navigate around this stuff and avoid it to your best ability. I don't think you have to worry that you're betraying your ideals or something like that if you don't go up to HR and tell them how you really feel. It only really becomes a problem if they put you in a position where they are telling you that you must affirm an untruth. For example, like you have to use the male pronoun for a woman or vice versa. If you're backed into a corner and it's like, I have to go along with the lie or I lose my job, well, then you just lose your job. I know it's easy for me to say, but that's got to be the only option. But fortunately, even with things like that, there's usually a way around it. You can use someone's name rather than a pronoun, so there are usually ways to avoid it. But I think only in those scenarios are you sort of morally called to make that hard choice. Last thing that I'll say is and I'm not familiar with all the legality here, and I don't know if you've been in one of these positions yet, but I hear about people that they go into these, they have these HR seminars, and it's like this mandatory indoctrination into white guilt and gender ideology. A lot of this stuff is also actually illegal, especially on the racial end of it. If you're sitting in an HR seminar and they're telling you that every white person in this room is inherently racist or something like that, that's racial discrimination. It's actually against the law. And the only reason it continues to go on is that employees that are subjected to it don't sue. The only way to stop it is in the courts, to sue. And so if you ever find yourself in that position, maybe that would be something to consider. But until then, I think it's fine to keep your head down and trudge on forward. Thanks.
Hi, Matt.
Oh, sorry.
Hi. I'm Angie Mom. I'm here. I have been running Apprentice University along with Rob Brumberger for 9 years, 7 years on my part. We are addressing everything that you were saying tonight. We believe that men are men, women are women. There is absolutely no question. We believe in our founding documents, in our founding fathers, who created what we have here in this country. along with other people here in Indianapolis, like David Seipel, Coram Deo, and other people, we are fighting against culture. And we believe we are starting to win. At Apprentice University, we are creating young adults who are founded in these principles, who are going out and effectively changing culture. We can and are changing culture. Maya, we have an answer, wherever you are, we have an answer for college. We are the college you need to be at. We don't question men and women. We don't question any of that. We are producing young adults who are going out into this volatile, uncertain, chaotic world and are prepared for everything that's coming at them with a foundation that is completely centered on truth. Matt, how do you and everyone at the Daily Wire come alongside us who have already founded and are running successful opportunities outside of the government, in any control of the government, who have figured out how to do it, but we need help on a national platform to take it bigger? How do you come alongside of us and help us continue to change the culture? Because we can do it, we can take it back. We are and we can. Thank you so much for being here.
I appreciate that you found a way to make that a question at the end. You didn't even have to do that, it's fine. What'd you say the name of your organization is? Apprentice?
Apprentice University, not skilled trades.
Okay.
Every other.
Well, how can I work with you? It's hard for me to answer that question because I don't know anything about your organization yet. But I will look into it. And I'm always encouraged to find, not only that there are educational institutions that have not succumbed to the woke left, but also that are finding creative ways to educate. Because for too long we've been stuck in this assembly line kind of mode of education where you get all the kids onto the same system and shuffle them through until the end. Education is not that way. People are different. We need different and more creative ways to educate. So it sounds like that's what you're doing. I'll look more into it, but I appreciate it. Thank you.
Hey, Matt, my question is about a clip I saw probably on Daily Wire of a congressional hearing where a trans activist said she had no understanding of detransitioners.
Yeah.
And I guess my question is anything being done with the detransitioners to organize better? Because it would seem like that would be a powerful voice. I don't believe her that she didn't know detransitioners and that was happening, but I was just curious what...
Yeah, that's a great question. That was an outrageous moment in that hearing. And it's interesting because the left will silence people and then turn around and say, "Oh, I didn't know they existed. We couldn't hear them." Well, you shut them down. That's why you couldn't hear them. I agree with you that detransitioners are increasingly a very powerful voice, an indispensable voice in this movement. When we had our rally against child mutilation in Tennessee, we had Chloe Coles, a detransitioner, 18-year-old girl who went through this, and I thought gave a really powerful speech, and so we're working on that. I have a couple things I'm personally working on with detransitioners to get their stories out. I think that's part of it, and then the next part is organizational. There should be organizations of detransitioners, not only to get their stories out, but so that other kids who go through this and are looking for resources and help have somewhere to go. And I think that's just now starting. Chloe Cole's one who's, I think, starting an organization. So we're at the infancy of this, but I think we're starting to see that happen. Yeah.
I think we have time for one last question.
Okay.
Oh, two last questions?
Okay.
Okay, two last questions.
Can you hear me?
There's always two last.
Okay. I'm a native of Bloomington, Indiana, which is the home of the Kinsey Institute. And so it's an hour south. And we have Indiana University. And that campus is so woke, and there's so much going on with the universities. The left has the universities of our country. This is part of the problem in our country, is we have turned over our children to the education of the left to the universities. And so I would like to know, you talked about bringing awareness. What could we do and I'm a native of Bloomington, Indiana, both town and gown. What can we do to begin to take back the university campuses on this in this country? What are some steps that you would recommend?
Well, my honest answer is rather depressing. Maybe not surprised. Because my honest answer is that I don't know that we can. I mean, in the short term anyway. The universities have been, we use the word woke, but that doesn't even begin to describe it. They've just been fundamentally left-wing in their, institutionally for decades now. And I think many of them are simply lost. I think part of waging a competent culture war is to realize when institutions are lost. And so the ultimate goal of the institute, what needs to happen to the university system, the modern university system, is it needs to be demolished essentially and then rebuilt from scratch. And how do we do that? One of the ways that we do that is by starving these systems, rather than as we talked about before, by default funneling our kids and our money into this system while telling us that there's some way that we can reform it at the same time. We have to keep our money out of it and our kids. Now there are exceptions. I mean, there are, if your child is 18 and wants to be a doctor, then there's no way around it, or an engineer or something. But most professions don't actually require it. And many of the professions that do require the degree, it's artificially, it's an artificial requirement. They require it because they can get away with it, because they know that we're by default funneling our kids into this system. I think if we start pulling them out, then we'll start to see some real changes. But what we can't do is to continue to fund the system and to feed it with our own kids while also trying to reform it at the same time. I don't think it works that way. So, that's my answer. Thanks.
Hi, Matt. I'm about to graduate in May, and I have a lot of my political views online, and I'm about to start applying for jobs. So, what do you suggest? Do you suggest that I delete my Facebook? Because I am scared. I am scared they're gonna obviously they're gonna look through my stuff, but I'm nervous that they're gonna just throw her out. We're not even gonna hire her based on credentials or anything because of what my beliefs are.
Well, even if you weren't going to apply for jobs, I'd tell you it's a good idea to delete the Facebook. And that is my answer. We don't want to hide our light under a bushel. I understand that, but there's no real advantage to using most of these social media platforms, to living our lives on them the way that we do, and to putting in writing every single thought that happens across our heads. There's no advantage to that. It can be used against us. It's rarely going to work in our favor. So I think just in general, as a lifestyle issue, it will not hurt you. It can only help you to delete every social media platform. And by the way, I say that as someone who, if everyone deletes their social media, I don't have a job anymore. And yet I still think you should do it. And if it works out and Americans find a life outside of the internet and outside of social media, and Facebook and Twitter and TikTok come crumbling to the ground, and that means I got to go work at Walmart, I'm fine with that. That's a trade that I'll make, because I think it'll mean a healthier country in a lot of ways. Thank you. All right. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.
I just wanted to make a few quick announcements I forgot to make at the beginning. I wanted to thank our speaker, who has to leave now. He's got a very busy schedule. He's going to Charlie Kirk and Turning Point USA's America Fest tomorrow, which many of you have probably seen advertised. So we appreciate him coming here tonight. I also wanted to thank Erin Tuttle. She's one of the co-founders of First Principles Forum. Her vision and leadership has been invaluable since the inception, and this event was no different. She helped tremendously with many, many ways. I wanted to recognize our elected officials who are here tonight. Congresswoman Victoria Spartz. Congresswoman-elect Erin Houchin. We appreciate you coming because these are important issues, and we are grateful that our elected officials come to hear the messages our speakers bring. And I want to be sure and let everyone know there's a dessert reception, complimentary beer and wine, a champagne toast to the new year following the presentation this evening at the conclusion of tonight. So please stay, mix and mingle with friends and family, and enjoy the beautiful Indiana War Memorial. But before we leave, I also wanted to honor any veterans that we have with us here tonight. Are there any veterans in the house? We thank you for your service to our nation. And with that, we'd like to invite our good friend, Brian Babs, for a special treat.
If you all would stand with me, please. And join me in singing God Bless America about this key right here. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. From the mountain